Japan is a cornerstone of car culture, formed through innovative technology, skilled artistry, obsessive passion, and a dark, illicit past. Today, the country is renowned for respect and order, but the streets were once filled with tens of thousands of rebellious teenagers and young adults, expressing themselves and their desire for change through their vehicles. With roots tracing back to the kamikaze pilots of World War II, subcultures have branched out and evolved over the years into a wide variety of disciplines, ranging from the illegal Kanjozoku racing on the loop and yakuza-inspired VIP cars, to fully legal signing competitions and flashy Lamborghinis. This is a story of traditions and trends, of violence and VTech, and of dollar figures and human fingers. This is the story of the Bosozoku, Kanjozoku, and much more. The word kamikaze translates to divine wind, like the ones that overcame invaders attacking Japan in the 1200s. The term was again used nearly 700 years later in World War II, for Japanese pilots that would intentionally sacrifice their lives for their country, crashing into enemy warships. While nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots died during missions, others were spared when the war ended, but struggled to integrate back into society. This was seen around the world, including America, where many returning veterans found excitement, brotherhood, and cheap therapy through biker gangs. Harley-Davidson and Indian had produced over 100,000 motorcycles for the war effort, and were now letting them go for scrap value. As a result, huge groups of bikers formed, leading to events like the Hollister Riot in 1947. This so-called riot was more of a large party, but a staged photo and a sensationalized article in Life magazine terrified citizens across the country. In an attempt to save their reputation, the American Motorcycle Association banned those riding chop bikes and wearing military jackets with club insignias from attending their events. This resulted in the formation of outlaw motorcycle gangs, such as the Hells Angels. In 1953, a film starring Marlon Brando called The Wild One was released, which furthered the reputation of these outlaw gangs. To many economically disadvantaged, marginalized teenagers and young adults, the idea of a misunderstood loner struck home, and various subcultures began to emerge, like greasers, who often sported motorcycle boots, leather jackets, and slicked back hair. Honda actually saw this as an opportunity to enter the US market, and advertised a motorcycle for someone who didn't want to appear as rebellious or dangerous. They even went with the slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." This campaign was hugely successful, and the Honda Super Cub would go on to become the most sold vehicle of all time. America wasn't alone, and countries all around the world were experiencing a rise of rebellious subcultures, from the mods and rockers of the UK to the reggae of Sweden, and Japan was no exception. After World War II, kamikaze pilots, soldiers, and those who could afford it also turned to motorcycles. Originally, there weren't any real clubs or gangs, and instead anyone with a bike was welcome to join in. The media created the term Kaminari-zoku, which roughly translates to Thunder Tribe, referencing the collective sound of all the motorcycles racing around, often with loud exhausts. Sometimes cars would join in, but automotive manufacturers were still crippled from the war, and very few people were able to afford a car. Even motorcycles were still a luxury at this time. However, as the economy bounced back, bikes became readily available and popular with a wide demographic, including high school students. Even those who had no interest in motorcycles, racing, or anything of the sort began riding them for the freedom they allowed. Some began to form gangs, and conflict began to occur. In 1972, there was an incident where over 3,000 riders damaged cars and stores, sparking the media to coin a new term, Bosozoku. Bosozoku translates to running out of control tribe, or even violent tribe. In 1973, there was an estimated 12,500 members in gangs, but that number would soon increase drastically, partially due to the media attention. Influenced by movies, kamikaze pilots, American choppers, British cafe racers, and more, the young generation adapted all of their favorite parts into the new subculture. The bikes were modified to stand out as much as possible. They had loud exhausts, ridiculous 3-stage seats, protruding fairings, and wild paint schemes. The hairstyles and outfits worn were equally over the top, with most riders donning what were called tokofuku, special attack outfits, embroidered with designs and mantras written in kanji. Some wore hachimaki as well, headbands often associated with kamikaze pilots. And some groups even appropriated symbols like the Nazi swastika, not because of their own beliefs, but for even greater shock value. People have claimed that Black Emperor actually used the manji, an ancient symbol used in Japanese Buddhism to signify good fortune ahead and to mark temples on a map. But this isn't the case, as the group used the Nazi swastika, facing the opposite direction. Each night, members would take to the streets in droves, trying to find excitement. Most gangs consisted of young men between the ages of 16 to 20, although there were some women as well, often known as sukiban. At the peak in 1982, there were over 42,000 members in surprisingly organized gangs, such as Black Emperor and Spectre. There were leaders, captains, and sometimes units like Strike Force or Cavalry. They preached a high sense of morality with an emphasis on loyalty and honor, following what some might call Bushido Code or the Way of the Samurai. While there are accounts of groups helping civilians like those who got stuck in a ditch, these values often manifested in fights between groups and far more serious crimes, with riders carrying baseball bats, sticks, swords, and Molotov cocktails. Bolstered by the large size of the groups, some would even set traps, stretching a rope across the road to kidnap members of rival gangs and strip them of their uniforms. At this time, around 1/4 of crime committed in Japan involved Bosozoku members. The yakuza, essentially the mafia of Japan, capitalized on the young biker gangs and would get members to carry out tasks for them like running drugs in return for protection and peace. With these relationships in place, roughly 1/3 of all yakuza recruits came from Bosozoku gangs, and would transition into more serious crimes with more serious consequences, like yubitsume or finger shortening, to atone for a mistake or as punishment. Not all members went down the crime rabbit hole though, and others were far more interested in the vehicles. Of course, there were the motorcycles, often referred to as kaizosha, meaning modified vehicles, but the word can also be applied to cars. A lot of terms were thrown around, some of which were umbrella terms, like zokusha, meaning gang car, or shakotan, meaning low car, the Japanese equivalent of a low rider. There was a well-known manga later made into a live-action film and anime called Shakotan Boogie, featuring two friends obsessed with street racing, girls, and shakotan. One of the most well-known cars was a Fairlady Z called Yankee Mate. The word Yankee was used in Japan to refer to youth delinquents, similar to Bosozoku, but with less emphasis on the bikes. Yankee-style cars tend to look like shakotan with some additional pseudo-functional mods, like fender flares and oil coolers, often hanging out the front of the car. Other vehicles sported huge takayari exhausts, meaning bamboo spears, often shaped into stars or hearts. There were also haiso, meaning high society cars that became popular in the 80s. These were modified luxury cars, often white with white wheels, and were the precursor to bipu or VIP cars, again modified luxury sedans. VIP cars are often associated with the yakuza, although in reality, unlike the Bosozoku, the yakuza preferred to stay under the radar and would typically avoid such flashy modifications. Another umbrella term is kaido racer, which translates to highway racer. These came in all different shapes and sizes, with different prefectures putting their own spin on their rides. One popular style that emerged was grachan, meaning Grand Champion, referencing Group 5 special production race cars. These super silhouette cars were supposed to retain the original bodywork, but the rules were pushed to the limits. Once again, Norbert Singer of Porsche pushed the furthest, moving the headlights down into the bumper, and while the car retained the original rear windshield, the team added a second, more aerodynamic windshield to cover the original. What used to be a Porsche 930 transformed bit by bit, culminating in the 935-78, lovingly dubbed Moby Dick due to its gigantic whale tail and white paint. Nissan had a few successful and popular cars as well, like the Bluebird, an S12 Silvia, and of course, a Skyline. These cars heavily influenced gearheads and car styling, resulting in the wild Grachan subculture, which took obvious cues from the championship-winning race cars. Those who wanted to race themselves often took their cars on public roads and could be called Hashiriya, meaning one who runs. This term could be applied to Keiichi Tsuchiya on the Toge, Midnight members on the Wangan, or the Kanjozoku, racing on the elevated highways of Osaka. The loop route, or Kanjozoku, travels clockwise around the heart of Osaka, forming a 10.3-kilometer loop. Unlike the wide open straights of the Wangan, which were perfect for high-powered turbo cars, the loop was much narrower, with tricky transitions better suited to small, nimble cars. In time, the humble Honda Civic would emerge as the crowd favorite, and become synonymous with the Kanjozoku. Street racers were again heavily inspired by motorsports, and modified their cars to be reminiscent of racing Civics, like the ones in Group A. Some say the looks of the cars were frequently changed to help relieve police pressure, and that drivers would hide their plates and often cover their face with masks and window nets. Most cars were powered by a trusty B-Series engine, had bucket seats, upgraded suspension, and sticky tires, with the focus on function over form. There were a huge number of teams, such as Top Gun, Lawbreak, Temple, and No Good Racing, all competing against one another. Of course, this was extremely dangerous on a public road, and eventually police would ramp up their efforts to crack down on the Kanjozoku until there was barely anyone left. Some went to other loops, like the C1 loop of Tokyo, to continue enjoying Roulette-Zoku culture, a more general term for loop racing. Other members moved on to taking their cars to the track instead, focusing their passion on new, more legal goals. Temple Racing has been involved in creating a time attack Civic that is lapping Tsukuba and other tracks ridiculously fast, especially considering the car is still naturally aspirated. One Kanjozoku enthusiast, Keimura, would end up losing his driver's license for 8 years, but he used the skills he'd built up making parts for Disneyland to create Rocket Bunny, known as Pandem in North America, one of the most well-known body kit companies in the world. Similarly, Wataru Kaido, an ex-Bosozoku member, would embrace the style of his roots as well to create Liberty Walk, a body kit company equally popular around the world. Other Bosozoku members moved on as well, and honed in on their interests. Some specialized in signing, making calls on a motorcycle that represented certain areas or teams, or custom creations that could be shown off and judged in dedicated competitions. Some members moved on to trucks, embracing the Decotora subculture, and others vans, through the subsect known as vanning. One ex-member even chose to modify Lamborghinis, Shinichi Morohoshi. He grew up with a poster of the silhouette Tomica skyline on his wall, was part of the Bosozoku for many years, and had ties to the yakuza. The government and police have worked diligently to eradicate these illegal groups. Even yakuza numbers are dwindling thanks to laws prohibiting members from opening bank accounts, having mobile phones, buying a car, or even renting a place to stay. Of the remaining 24,000 or so, the average age has now risen to over 54 years old. The Bosozoku and Kanjozoku have nearly completely died out, but there are still some die-hard enthusiasts, crazy enough to continue the dangerous traditions today. Some past Bosozoku members try to support the new generation, others scorn them, and some just want to enjoy their classic vehicles, Kyusha, traveling around between cruises and shows with their friends. The subcultures explored in this video may have a dark past, but through the years they've evolved and inspired various forms of art, fashion, and expression. Japanese laws once prohibited vehicle modification of any kind, and enthusiasts were forced to operate illegally before creating enough influence to push their passion into the mainstream, with manufacturers themselves embracing tuning culture. Some might argue that the envelope has been pushed too far, with cars like Atasha literally translating to painful car, describing those covered in tribute to the owner's favorite characters. Of course, there are examples of niche automotive subcultures all around the globe, and while they likely aren't all your cup of tea, I think it's great that people are now able to explore their passions and push their ambitions in so many different ways without having to endanger others or themselves. As always, this video barely scratches the surface, and there are all kinds of even more niche Japanese automotive subcultures to explore, but I hope you enjoyed this summary. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and leave a comment suggesting any topics you'd like to see covered in a future video. I'm really curious to read the comments on this video, and I'll note any corrections or updates in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.